pictures. Well, I'm hoping that the Chinese publish a lot of those pictures, because our own NASA people took many pictures. The Army took thousands of pictures under the Clementine project. Are you familiar with Clementine?
I've heard of it.
It was not a NASA program, it was an Army program, Department of Defense. They took thousands of pictures. They've only released a dozen or so. They took pictures all around the moon, backside, bottom, top, everywhere.
Well, are you in touch with Richard Hoagland?
I know Richard. He's a good friend.
Okay. So you know some of his recent research?
Ah, well, I read his recent book, which is dynamite.
Uh-huh. Okay. You know about the secret space program?
Oh, yeah.
And you know about the von Braun and the Nazis and what's been carried over to the U.S.
Oh, honey, it's
political
bigger
system?
than that.
Okay. Well,
much bigger.
But when I raised up Richard Hoagland's information and the stuff that he's bringing forward about von Braun, the Nazis, you know, paperclip, and you're saying it's much beyond that. So where are we going with
well,
that?
our original space program was all the product of the Nazi Party. Without von Braun and his crew and the paperclip program, I don't think we would have gotten to the moon when we did. We certainly wouldn't have beaten the Russians. Of course, the Russians grabbed their crowd. They also went into Germany and grabbed a bunch of scientists. And then the Russians have a tremendous scientific program of their own. You know, they didn't need Nazi scientists. They would have eventually done it on their own anyhow. But one of the biggest secrets of all is the secret space program, the fact that NASA is, it's like Blue Book used to be. I think it's a public relations front.
Right. Yeah.
Blue Book never handled the real good stuff. And everybody knew that, except the common folk out there, who were diddled regularly and never told the truth about anything. But the big secret seems to have been for so long is, why are we keeping classified the enormous facilities on the moon? And they're not ours.
Whose are they?
Well, that's a good question. I can tell you flatly who they are.
Okay.
You familiar with the term Anunnaki?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you really have to understand Zecharia Sitchin's work to really grasp where we stand today in relationship with this group of intelligences. And I'm not speaking of one. There are several. The last I heard, there were 4 different groups we were relating with. The Anunnaki are one, and there are others.
Okay, this is very interesting. Can you describe the Anunnaki that first of all, have you had exposure to them face to face?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, I've met some face to face.
Okay.
Now, whether they were the Anunnaki, I don't know.
Okay, well...
The ones I've run face to face were typically human.
Typically human.
I mean, they could put on a suit, tie, dress, blue jeans, t-shirt.
Okay.
Walk in our midst and you would never know.
And they weren't 9 feet tall or higher?
No. The ones I've met and the ones I've seen aboard the ships are not that big at all. They're just like us. So we're dealing with 4 different groups that I've concluded, my own personal view.
Okay.
Yeah, you might talk to Jim Sparks and he might tell you there are 8 or 10 or a dozen more. You know, I don't know. I can only tell you what little bit I've learned over the years. There are 4 different groups that I've encountered, and they're all humanoid. One group is completely human. And not all of the Anunnaki are 9 feet tall. They were human enough that we are related to them and they're related to us. And that lovely little story in chapter 6 of Genesis is quite true. They did indeed engineer the genes and chromosomes of an existing species on this planet. God knows how long ago. Sitchin says it was 200,000 years. The information I have learned indicates that one of the major tweaking took place about 60,000 years ago. That Homo sapiens sapiens was tweaked and genetically manipulated even more. So we're coming along slowly.
Okay, so what 4 races? Let's name them, in your opinion.
Well, there are the humans.
Okay.
Some people call them the Nordics. Then you have guys that are very pale and very tall and very broad, which some people refer to as the big whites.
Okay.
And then you have the little guys.
The grays, and then the Anunnaki. So those are the 4 you're familiar with.
And not all of the grays are an evolved species. Some of them appear to be what they used to use. They were an artificial life form.
Androids.
Yeah, they were humanoid androids, but they were constructed. They're laboratory products. And they often wondered why, in cases of crashes, where there were survivors, that some of them didn't come back and try to retrieve. And the story that came out among the military for many years was that they wrote them off. They went back and made more. Now there are some people who say, well, they don't have a soul. Well, I run into human beings that I began to wonder whether they had a soul. But
okay,
there are 2 types of grays from what I've learned. There are the little guys who would appear to be laboratory products. And then there are the 6-foot grays, whose eyes are more round. And they're not really gray, they're just sort of a chalky, off-white color. And they seem to be an evolved race all of their own. And I think those are the ones that probably ran into Betty Hill and Barney at the incident many years ago.
Have you heard about Dan Burish talking about the Orions that are sitting in ships along with the military, actually watching the planet right now?
I've heard bits and pieces of that. I don't know too much about Dan's story. He's come up with a great many things.
Okay, but this is just new information that he's actually come forward with.
Well,
and they're watching the planet to see what happens and whether or not we have a catastrophe of any kind, and whether they might have to step in.
We have photographs, and many of them I'm going to share and show. I have slides, photographs of gigantic objects. I'm talking about humongous objects in space. And many of them are in satellites around their orbit around the planet. Many of them are in orbits around the moon, around Mars. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to share that I got from a Soviet cosmonaut on what happened with the Phobos thing. The Russians, you know, their famous Phobos rocket system that they sent up there some years back, which got knocked out of orbit by an anomalous object that came up from the surface. But it had taken a number of outstanding photographs before it was damaged and crashed.
Okay, what will you called it an anomalous, I don't know, object that came up from the surface, meaning the surface of the
Mars.
moon?
From
our Earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the Phobos program was sent to Mars because they had hoped to land a lander on the satellite Phobos. There are 2 circling Mars, which are anomalous. Again, that fantastic word, anomalous. Astronomers consider them anomalous because, first of all, they're going in the wrong direction for a natural satellite, whatever that means. They're too small to be natural satellites, and they're too close to the surface of Mars to have survived. Because if they were natural, they would long ago have been brought down and sucked in by gravity and crashed. The fact that they're still there puzzles everybody. So the Russians said, we're going to land on Phobos. It's about 12 miles in diameter. I think Deimos is only about 6 or 7. And they were going to take some pictures on the surface. Well,